Illustrations in children's books often depict guards or hunters wielding funny-looking firearms with short, broad barrels flared at the end. But this type of firearm is not fictional and, in fact, not funny at all either. Known as a blunderbuss, it was a large-caliber musket that was loaded with round lead shot or sometimes even cut pieces of lead. The short barrel allowed for a lighter weapon. The downside was lower accuracy and shorter range, but pirates were okay with that. Close combat required neither. In fact, the broad dispersion of the lead shot was an immense advantage of a blunderbuss. You could kill two birds with one shot, literally. There's a common misconception that the fluted end of the barrel was exactly what caused a wider area of damage. In reality, the fluting end was needed to make loading faster and more convenient, and faster loading allowed for faster shooting, which was another significant advantage back in the day of single-shot firearms. Number 8. Butterfly sword. Not to be outdone by their European counterparts, Chinese pirates had unusual weapons of their own. One of their favorites was a pair of bat jamdu, or butterfly swords as they were called in the West. This pretty name is actually a bit of a misnomer. Bat jamdu were short and broad chopping blades, perhaps a little longer than 1.5 feet and almost 3 inches wide, but weighing almost 2 pounds apiece. Imagine the sheer force of a well-executed cut with a weapon like that. The massive handle provided a comfortable grip, and a broad D-shaped guard had the dual function of protecting the hand and adding still more weight so that the bat jamdu could be used as a knuckle duster. The top end of the guard continued on the reverse side of the blade and curved up, giving the weapon its distinctive look. This feature was used for catching the enemy's blade and twisting it out of their hands. When not in use, both butterfly swords were kept in one scabbard next to each other, indeed looking similar to a pair of butterfly's wings. What a romantic name for a very practical weapon. Number 9. Knock gun. This 7-barreled monster weighed over 13 pounds. It looked somewhat similar to a 19th century multi-barrel revolver, but with a few notable differences. The revolver fired from one barrel after another, while this long gun shot in volleys. All 7.51-inch barrels shared one flintlock. The gun was a muzzle loader. The shooter had to put powder and a bullet into each of the 7 barrels. Even with experience, this process took about 2 minutes. Practically, this translated into only one volley per fight. However, the power of the resulting lead storm was devastating, cutting a swath in the enemy formation. Together, all bullets in a volley weighed more than 6 ounces. Naturally, the recoil after such a shot was truly vicious.
Got a little bit of kick to it.
Number 10. High Seas Artillery. In movies and pop culture, the only thing pirates seem to be doing is firing broadside and sinking hapless merchantmen, but nothing could be further from the truth. A pirate's main objective was to take as much booty as possible. From their perspective, there was no sense in making holes in a ship that potentially held unknown riches. Pirates still might use heavy cannonballs in order to scare the enemy and force them to stop, but much more often, buccaneer ships fired so-called chain shot, smaller cannonballs joined with one another by a rugged iron chain. Pirate gunners would aim above the deck of the enemy ship and send chain shot flying over it, crashing masts, destroying rigging, and taking out opposing pirates. Another favorite projectile was lead shot. Instead of conventional small balls, pirates could use chopped pieces of lead or basically any other metal bits. Remember the cannon in Pirates of the Caribbean firing forks and knives? It may have looked funny in the movie, but in real life, a shot like that would claim many lives. Weapon number 1. Fear. One might think pirates were bloodthirsty lunatics. There are 3 things a real pirate couldn't do without: a ship, a keg of rum, and a good weapon. And if you think the last one must either be a sword or a pistol, well, then you're in for a surprise. Back in the times of honest swashbuckling, the weapon alternatives were nearly endless, including some truly unorthodox ones. Ever seen a pistol axe, a handheld bombard, or a 7-barrel flintlock gun? Ever wonder if pirates could really charge a cannon with forks? The answer is aye, matey. Number 1. Axe gun. This incredible hybrid weapon looks like it's come right out of a fantasy movie, but it's an actual historical piece that pirates used in boarding battles. The only type of firearm that could be combined with an axe was a long-barrel, heavy-caliber musket. First of all, taking aim over a hefty axe head was difficult, and the shooter had to rely on the area damage of the grape shot. Second, only a large musket would make a handle stout enough to be used in a melee. Typically, the head was similar to that of a warhammer, with the front blade used for cleaving foes or hacking through doors, and the pick on the reverse for busting open treasure chests. Sometimes course, pirates combined axes with smaller musketoons and pistols as well. While unlikely to cut through aged oak, these lighter, hatchet-like arms were still quite useful in close combat. Of course, conventional axes and muskets were more effective and reliable, but lugging along one large item instead of two was a difference big enough to make these combo weapons popular. Number 2. Hand mortar. At one point during one of the fighting scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean, a short man appears on the deck armed with a big gun. It looks bizarre indeed. A short, tumbler-like barrel with a huge stock. Oddly enough, this isn't a product of the filmmaker's fancy. The weapon did exist and was called a hand mortar. However, historically it was loaded with grenades, not lead shot. The shooter put black powder in the compact chamber and placed an explosive missile in the barrel through the wide muzzle. Discharging the weapon would send the grenade flying as far as 100 feet. It doesn't sound very impressive today, but perhaps not too bad for the flintlock great-grandpa of modern bazookas. Number 3. Flintlock volley handgun. Throughout history, multiple barrel firearms are not that rare, but this one is positively unique. Thanks to the splayed arrangement of the barrels, it was called a duck's foot pistol. The multiple barrels had a common breech and lock. Despite the somewhat silly looks, the duck's foot unleashed devastating volleys at close range. Accurate aiming was impossible and unnecessary. The idea was to shoot at a crowd. Bullets sprayed out almost randomly, and the shooter could control only the height and general direction of the discharge. Duck's foot volley pistols came in 3, 4, and 5 barrel varieties. Fancier models also featured a small dagger in the middle of the foot. Although it's anyone's guess as to how the owner was supposed to use the dagger, the sheer appearance of the whole thing was just as intimidating as it was confounding. This is understandable. If you see someone armed to the teeth, chances are that person isn't planning to pet a kitten. In reality though, pirates had a more practical approach. They were fully prepared to fight for spoils, but if the booty could be taken peacefully, that was even better. Why risk your life when you don't have to? This is why the pirates' favorite strategy was intimidation. They put a lot of effort and creativity into painting themselves as bloody murderers in the eyes of others. No wonder, considering this might have made the difference between life and death. And so all those black sails, scary images on the flags, and ostentatious executions of those who dared to resist were part of this strategy. Take, for instance, the notorious Blackbeard. Even now, 300 years later, we know him as one of the cruelest and bloodiest among pirates. And back in the 18th century, merchants hurried to surrender immediately upon sighting his flag, all because Blackbeard built a truly impressive reputation. He let his hair and beard grow wild, which gave him a savage, ferocious look. He used to hide smoldering cannon wicks under his hat so as to appear in front of the adversary surrounded with billowing smoke. He even spread rumors about having sold his soul to the devil and himself becoming a demon. Blackbeard didn't skimp on the weapons either. He carried a cutlass in his sheath, several pistols under the belt, and still more pistols and daggers attached to the harness over his shoulders. Indeed, even Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie Predator didn't look so formidable. Blackbeard ran a special flag on his ship. The image on the black canvas wasn't the usual Jolly Roger, but depicted the devil, the infamous pirate's personal brand. In one hand, the devil held a watch, in the other, a spear aimed at a trembling heart. The message the whole picture sent was clear: surrender quickly or die. And the merchants did surrender. Over some 2 years of marauding on the high seas, Blackbeard plundered a multitude of ships, and his exploits hadn't always ended up in violence. True, he treated any resistance with horrifying cruelty, but if the enemy surrendered without a fight, the pirate acted like a gentleman. He wouldn't torture or kill hostages for no reason. Captured sailors were offered a choice: either join his crew or be taken to the nearest island, which typically was inhabited and had a port, with no mass executions and no atrocities. Essentially, Blackbeard used fear to defeat his enemies. This earned him enormous respect among his crew members. With a captain like that, you didn't need to risk your life every time. Some merchantman sailors would even go over to join Blackbeard's band while their old ship was still being plundered. Goes to show that even 18th century pirates valued brains more than brute force. Hey, thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you next time. Number 4. Pistol Sword. Although combining a handgun with a blade sounds no less strange than combining one with an axe, the former turned out to be more practical. After all, a sword can be lighter than an axe and doesn't require an especially rugged handle. Of the two methods of joining a sword and a pistol, gunsmiths preferred mounting the blade onto the barrel. Eventually, this concept evolved into the bayonet, which became an instant win design-wise. The less common method involved fitting the blade onto the breech and tucking it away inside a long stock of the pistol. The shooter fired, then cocked the gun again and opened the lock part. Next, with a swift trickster's motion, the pirate would detach the barrel, turning it into an elegant sword hilt. True, it was rather narrow and slippery, but nothing could be done about that. Number 5. Sword Breaker. At first glance, this peculiar weapon looks like a handsaw, but the real purpose of the deeply serrated edge on this blade was to capture the foe's sword. As soon as the adversary's blade got stuck between the sword breaker's curved teeth, working it free was easier said than done. As for the defender, he just needed to make a sharp twist with his hand to break free. However, this would break most thrusting swords, and cutting blades, which were usually wider, were ripped out of the attacker's hand. Typically, a sword breaker was held in the left hand and used together with a cutlass or saber held in the right, but not every pirate dared to wield this two-blade combination. The fencing technique it required was rather complicated, and it took a truly skillful fencer to use it efficiently. Number 6. Cutlass. In the movies, you might have seen pirates enthusiastically swinging long sabers, while nobles and gentlemen of discernment prefer rapiers. These long swords look fearsome indeed, but in close quarters melee, which was basically any sword fight on board a ship, they were less effective due to the lack of space. Historically, pirates at sea used cutlasses as their favorite melee weapon. A cutlass had a rather short, heavy, single-edged blade and looked similar to a saber. However, the differences between the two were significant. An average 18th century saber was about 3 feet long and 1.5 inches wide. Cutlass blades never reached more than 2.5 feet in length, but they were broader, over 2 inches wide. The solid guard was also broad enough to provide reliable hand protection, and the heavy pommel often ended with a steel knob for clubbing the foe. Cutlasses were ideal for hand-to-hand crowd combat on the deck of a ship. They were also great for cutting ropes and even hacking through wooden doors. Back in the Buccaneer era, wooden doors weren't flimsy plywood rectangles, but thick and solid structures made of aged hardwood. So a cutlass was a multifunctional military tool that could be used as a saber, a knuckle duster, a hatchet, and even a heavy axe. Number 7. Blunderbuss.